This episode of the Virginia History Podcast is brought to you by a suggestion from one of our patrons, James Dean. James, thank you for alerting me to the 400th anniversary celebration that is taking place at Falling Creek.
Carry me back to old Virginia. Carry me back to old Virginia. There's where the cotton and the corn.
1619 was a year of many English New World firsts. One of those far too often neglected firsts was the industrial setup at Falling Creek Ironworks. Our guest today, Lyle Browning, is the chief archaeologist serving Falling Creek Ironworks. Mr. Browning has an extensive archaeological background. He earned degrees from Virginia Tech and Bradford University in the United Kingdom. After finishing education at Bradford, Lyle remained in England to work archaeological sites throughout the Isles that saw him dig Anglo-Saxon, Norse, and Norman-related locations. He also did a resistivity survey on a Tudor shipwreck in Plymouth Harbor, England, before he returned to Virginia. In 1980, Mr. Browning set up and ran the VDOT Cultural Resources Program, while also serving as the head of excavations for the James Center Canal Boat Excavation from 1983 to 1985. Lyle then got involved with iron research under leading archaeologist Tom Brady. This work put Mr. Browning into a great position to research Falling Creek Ironworks, as well as the later Archibald Carey Forge in Chesterfield, Virginia. Today, Mr. Browning serves both the Virginia Canals and Navigation Society, as well as Falling Creek Ironworks, where archaeological discoveries are still being made. I trust you'll enjoy this discussion as much as I did, because Lyle's knowledge of Falling Creek is second to none. Lyle, I appreciate you meeting with me tonight here and talking about Falling Creek Ironworks. As you mentioned before we started recording here, it's the beginning of industry, or heavy industry in the United States, or Virginia, American history as a whole. Can you tell us about the history of Falling Creek?
Falling Creek started 1619 with Benjamin Blewett, who came over with 150 people, and he was due to set up 3 such ironworks. They had some fairly major funding for the time. When he came over, unfortunately, he died either on the voyage over or shortly thereafter, and probably all that got done was a bit of land clearance and things of that nature. In 1621, that's when John Berkeley, who is an ironmaster from Gloucestershire, came over with 25 people to set up the Falling Creek Ironworks. Now, the 150 people plus Blewett, nobody knows what happened to them. Unfortunately, one of the things that nobody bothered to tell the British was that something like 90% of the people who first came over died within the first year due to what they called seasoning. So you come out of 55-degree summer weather in Britain to Virginia, where it's hot, humid, you're wearing British, woolen clothing. You come over here, you roast, you've got bugs, you've got all sorts of things that you didn't have in Britain, and diseases and the rest of it. And people just, the stronger ones survived, the weaker ones did not. So those 150 people, may have been 10 or 15 of them left. And certainly there were not any left when Berkeley came over.
Right.
Now, he had one of those annoying little historical things. There's a letter that survives that said that he had the same contract as Blewett. So they didn't bother to describe what the new contract was, and the old one does not survive, so nobody knows what the terms were for this new venture. Well, he wrote back in 2 letters, and one said, Falling Creek Ironworks is in a great state of towardness, which translated from 17th century jargon means we've almost got the thing built. It's ready to go. And, it's under construction, but nearly complete, that kind of thing. They wrote back another letter that said, I think the phrase was, it was in a great state of towardness was the phrase that he used. In his other letter, he said, we shall have a great supply or plentiful supply of iron by Whitsuntide next. So I went on several little search engines and said, okay, we had a switch from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar. Things got flipped around. When exactly in 1622 terms would Whitsuntide have fallen? And it was June the 9th in 1622. Well, if you're running a blast furnace, you have to have water power. That means a dam, a flume, and a water wheel. And the weather cannot be so cold that it will freeze the wheel. So you're talking about an operation that began, let's say, mid-February, 1st February, mid-February at the very earliest, because the wheel has to turn. If it freezes, your whole furnace operation has got to be basically taken apart and rebuilt, and they don't want to do that. So it could have been an operation in late 1621. That's possible. Let's say a month to 6 weeks, he could have been in blast. He could have been in blast as early as, let's say, February 1, February 15th. And then by March the 22nd, that's when the Powhatans descended on him. Well, not just Falling Creek, but the whole of the Virginia colony, and killed something like 25% of the total number of people here. Powhatan, or Wahun Sunakok, as his real name was, he knew how to deal with folks, keep them on edge, and the rest of it. He was basically an emperor and chief of a confederacy, but he basically knew how to deal with people. John Smith was the guy. Well, he was in chains. He was going to be executed. And then when they got here, they opened a letter that basically said he was in charge of the whole shooting match at Jamestown, and sort of the 180-degree turn. And in my view, he's why Virginia is here, why the United States is here. I think without him, we'd all be speaking Spanish. But that guy was just absolutely amazing. He also knew how to deal with potentates because he had dealt with them when he was in various wars. He was besieged in a city, I think in Hungary, and he got bored and he challenged the Turks to single combat, and he has 3 Turks' heads on his coat of arms. And the reason being, they called a little truce. They came out into the field, and he literally removed the heads of Turk number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4 decided he's not going to do it. So he was that good a swordsman, and he was also a very good diplomat. You're dealing with state stuff.
Right, without him being on the scenes, Powhatans felt like they could go a little bit further.
Yeah. Well, when you're dealing state-to-state relations, and the head of state, being Powhatan, deals with the emissary for the English crown, and that would be Smith, there's diplomatic language and diplomatic niceties that are upheld. And if Powhatan, who did, give him articles of his personal nature, and those are viewed as almost holy relics in a way. They're state-to-state gifts, and John Smith knew how to deal with that stuff. The guys after him basically said, "What? You're giving me a pair of old, nasty old moccasins? You peasant," that kind of, and things went south. And then Powhatan died as his brother Opechancanough took over, and Opechancanough was not a guy who liked the English at all. So he's the one who organized the 22 massacre, and he also organized the 1644 massacre exactly 22 years later. So what happened at Falling Creek was everything disappeared. There were 2 stories about it, one of which was everybody was killed at Falling Creek, and the other one was everybody but 2 little kids were killed. So nobody knows, nobody will ever know, because the records simply don't survive, and there are no stories that survive. John Berkeley's son, Morris, he was at Jamestown, I think, or somewhere safe. Anyway, he was not killed. So he came back, and the story was he tried to get it going a little bit, and nothing is known to have happened. Sir John Zeus, who was a major, well, actually wasn't a major, a minor backer of the Virginia Company, sold his castle in Britain for £10,000, which is probably several million in today's terms. He lamented in his will that he had spent, I forget exactly how much money he had spent, and his son had spent over £200 of dad's money as well, and I think the phrase was to no good result. So that's in the 1630s, and then William Byrd in the 1690s writes in his diary about maybe doing something to get Falling Creek going again, but nothing happened, and there it sat until 1750, when Archibald Carey inherited the property from his father Henry, and he built a forge, and that operated sort of. Well, again, it's always weird about Falling Creek. There are always two stories about everything. One story was it operated for a while, it wasn't profitable, and it was shut down. The other one was it kept going and never shut down. Well, we found the timbers, or at least they were exposed by two January gully washers that put about an inch of rain into the Falling Creek drainage and cleaned out that little channel that Hurricane, I think it was Francis, had opened up. And then I got a call from Ralph Lovren and said, we found some timbers down here. And I came down, and massive timbers were there. So we did a little investigation. We did dendrochronology. My thought was, hey, these timbers are so big. We're talking 24-inch square timbers in use. And sitting on top of them were 12-inch square ones. And in the back of that was a 36 by 44 by at least 8 foot long, one piece of timber. I thought, for sure, that's got to be the Ironwork stuff, because where else do you get stuff that big? All the old growth stuff would be gone by 1750. Well, wrong. Dendro showed that there were two cuts. One corresponded to the original construction in 1750, and then a redo either just at or just before the American Revolution. So both sides of the story are right. He probably did find it non-profitable and shut it down, and then cranked it up again for the Revolutionary War. There was one of these British kids. When they came of age, they would take a tour of the continent, come back with, works of art and all the rest of the stuff. Well, some of them came over here, and one of these guys came over 1769 and commented on the forge. Okay. And later, a British POW during the Rev War commented on the forge as well. Benedict Arnold comes in and burns it. Well, and that was the problem. He didn't specifically say he burnt the forge. He just said he burnt whatever was at Falling Creek. So it was, some people interpreted that to mean there was no forge there by that time. And so what the dendro proved was that both were right. It ran for a while, and he rebuilt it, and it went all the way through the Revolution. Archibald Carey, he was called the wheel horse of the Revolution. He bankrupted himself. He had that little sort of small plantation house across the river called Wilton, that's now in Windsor Farms, and he was a globalist before that term was even a term. He owned land in fact, lead mines in Wythe County. It took him, I think, a week to get there on horseback. But he was doing stuff that other people, on an industrial scale, other people simply did not. Both ventures at Falling Creek ended up being destroyed. One by the Powhatans, and the other one by the British. And then after 1781, it just sort of sat there until the first of the archaeology people started in that.
In 2007?
1879 is when the first one came through. A guy named R.A. Brock. I can't remember whether he's Smithsonian or he's Virginia Historical Society, one of the two anyway. But he came in, did some fiddling around, and then there are a whole series of other ones that came through after that, and every single one said, yeah, we found this is the furnace. And what they had found were, to date, nothing more than I say nothing more, it's a good example of an 18th century forge, but all they found is material that dates to that time period versus the earlier. Now, Ralph Lovren, I was telling him about the difference between a forge and a furnace. And a furnace basically takes iron ore and smelts it in it's a furnace stacked, things like 16 to 25 feet square and about the same high. And you fill it full of charcoal, light it up. It's like preheating an oven. And then you put in a layer of charcoal, a layer of iron ore, and a layer of oyster shell, which is calcium basically as a fluxing agent that combines with the stuff in the ore, which is not iron, and you smelt it. And you end up with two products, one of which is pig iron, which is the money product. Okay. And that's basically a molten ingot of iron. And the other product is glassy slag. And when I say glassy slag, it's literally glass. Stuff was used during the Depression for making depression glass out of. Basically, you just had to melt it again and do whatever, glass people do. And Ralph said, "Oh, I think I found one of those." And he didn't know what it was. He sort of tossed it in the back of his truck. And he and I are still trying to get together so that I can, ascertain, is it furnace slag or is it not? And our problem with it is that because Archibald Carey was there later, and what he did, a forge basically takes pig iron and puts it into what looks like a backyard barbecue and decarburizes it. And he would buy pig iron from another furnace, and there were several of those in Virginia operational in the 1750-80 period. So it's possible that a piece of glassy slag could have got into the shipment and would be from one of those other furnaces. But you could, and we're planning to, chemically fingerprint all the furnaces in the state of Virginia based on Tom Brady's collection of the furnaces, and he got slag samples and took photographs and all that during his lifetime. And what we're going to try to do is reconstitute his samples. Unfortunately, when he died, he willed all his material to the Historical Society. They came in and took a few samples away and left the rest, and it sat in his garden shed until his widow Bonnie decided to move into a retirement community. She called and said, "Come get the stuff," and nobody came. She called him again and said, "Come get it or it's going in the dump," and it went into the dump. Oh, no. So I've spent the last 25 years trying to reconstitute the samples, and I'm somewhere at the 60-70% level of getting recollecting all that material, and then we will do some pretty groundbreaking chemical fingerprinting, probably using portable X-ray fluorescence, PXRF, and that'll give you the chemical composition, and the slag will tell you it has the entire technological history of that furnace in it. So theoretically, you can isolate material from that one furnace and show that it's different from one 10 or 15, 20 miles away. But man, if that can be done, it's going to be done. So
that's the archaeology that's going on today. Is you're taking that slag and you're trying to date it and prove that you found the original, the 17th century. That's fascinating.
Yeah, that would be the aim. Yeah. We haven't we actually got that done yet, but that's once we get the slag in hand, then we'll be able to PRXF it and get it nailed down. Hopefully that happens. That would show that Falling Creek actually got in the blast, because Saugus, which claims to be, and that's in Saugus, Massachusetts, it claims to be the first British blast furnace in North America. And they're, shall we say, Johnny-come-lately of 1636 versus our 1622 version. Sure. And they've always said, we're the first one in the country to blast. If we can prove otherwise, then we will reclaim not only Thanksgiving, which Massachusetts lifted from us.
Certainly.
And we'll get that back. And then, we'll show that, they got in the blast.
Sure.
In part of my collection efforts, I went to a furnace in Wythe County, and it had been in operation. It was a fairly short-lived thing. It was only in operation for 4 years, and I had a heck of a time trying to find any slag from it. Yeah. And if Falling Creek was only in blast for a matter of, 2 to 3 months. Right, finding one piece of that stuff is going to be difficult. Hopefully what Ralph found is going to be the real deal. And then we can say, we will regain our rightful spot as the first in Well, it'll still be the first in the New World ever to have gotten in the blast. And it's the importance of the thing is that it is the beginning of all of Americans' industrial might and dominance started right there at Falling Creek. All of the heavy industry that ever happened in the United States of America began with, the great-great-granddaddy is Falling Creek, and that's the one that started it all. So
yes, sir.
That's why the thing is so important. I mean, you had Jamestown, which is obviously important as the first permanent English settlement. Your other firsts we've got, but the first in Chesterfield, and not just Chesterfield, not just Virginia, not just North America, but the first in the New World is Falling Creek. So it's a great little place, and in terms of significant firsts that you can just look back and say, here is how all of these industrial giants began. U.S. Steel, DuPont, all of those people who produce industrial materials, all of them can trace their original ancestor to one little spot in south of Richmond.
It's fascinating, especially when you look at the history of the area, just in that general area. Not too far from Falling Creek is Henricus, which planned to be a major power center, but again, that 1622 massacre, that alters it. That changes quite a bit.
Yes, it does.
And that's where a lot of the history, I don't want to say gets lost, but gets set aside, I guess, is a good way to say it. But the work that you and others are doing here in Chesterfield is certainly important. How can one learn more about Falling Creek's history? Do you have any books or websites and such that you recommend?
We have a website up that has as much history as we know, www.fallingcreekironworks.org, all slung together, no hyphens or anything else. And that has where it is, what it represents, the history of it, and all of that material. And what I think what we want to do with it is also in there. And it's just basically waiting for something good to happen, I think.
Right, which you're on the cusp of, and that's exciting. Looking forward to certainly seeing more coming out of Falling Creek. Now, how is Chesterfield County celebrating Falling Creek's upcoming 400th anniversary?
They have done a series of lectures. The Chamber of Commerce had a basically history of Virginia firsts, and there are also lectures at 4 different county libraries based on it. May the 4th is our standard yearly exposition, which we have Native Americans, 17th century soldiers, 17th century crafts, that sort of thing going on up on the hill. And there'll be a dedication ceremony for Brian Walker and his memory. And then I will be doing 4 tours of Falling Creek that are basically on 12, 1, 2, and 3, about 45 minutes each, and probably more than anybody ever wanted to know about iron will be explained to them. And and the county is also, I think, yesterday had a resolution at the Board of Supervisors dealing with the 400th anniversary as well. And we are planning to have events from 1619, 20, 21, and 22 as this thing goes along, so that we can commemorate a little bit more each year. And hopefully we'll know a good bit more each year as we go along about the thing. There's a lot of research to be done yet, and hopefully a lot of reconstruction will go on once we get appropriate funding to do so. I mean, I've got to be the only archaeologist in the country disappointed to get a good solid 18th century date out of dendrochronology. So what that means is that we have to excavate Archibald Carey's forge before we can get down to the 17th century operation. Now, in this 2-story business, the old story was Archibald Carey had his entire operation on the north bank of the creek,
Okay.
and that the Falling Creek Ironworks was only on the south side. Well, that's wrong. Cary there was a mill there. Now, what 17th century mill? It's quite possible that it is. It would have been built by William Byrd. If not, it was certainly built by Archibald Cary, and it was a grist mill. In his last iteration, it ground mica, which you put into paint to make glossy paint, and then it sort of went away. That was on the north side, and quite an impressive structure still left there. But Cary was on both sides of the creek. He was dumping his industrial materials onto that floodplain to build it up, to get it up out of standard river floods, which every year would come through in some measure or another. So he would use his sculls and mossers, which are the byproduct of each day's work. When you go home, the workers go home, the hearth fires cool down, you come back, there's a sort of foot diameter lump of bubbly slag there, and that basically gets crowbarred out of the hearth and dumped into a wheelbarrow. And when the wheelbarrow is full, you dump it out on the floodplain to help build up the land. And that stuff is literally all over the place. So, and we have those big wooden beams that are there. One of them, actually there are two. They are timber joined together, and their total length is 69 feet. So we've got roughly two 35-foot long, foot square logs to pull up and put in a tank somewhere and conserve them. And that's what I don't think, the general realization is you think industry, but when you start looking at it, the size of the thing is what is so absolutely astounding.
Right.
I mean, it's ironwork later in Virginia, 10,000 acres is not an unusual size for a blast furnace, because they had to have that kind of acreage to produce the charcoal.
How does that compare with something like Tredegar that's a little bit further up the river?
Well, Tredegar is basically a forge and foundry operation. So they buy pig iron from the furnaces that are upriver. In fact, just outside Roanoke in Botetourt County are the two Cloverdale furnaces, and both of them shipped their material down the river on the canal boats into Tredegar, and then Tredegar forged them into malleable iron and cast the stuff into cannons and whatever else they cast. They were, of course, famous for their Civil War production of cannons. Bologna Arsenal and Foundry, well, not so much the Arsenal, but the Foundry. Bologna Foundry was also, I think, the second biggest producer of cannons, certainly in Virginia, and I think in the South as well, during the Civil War. And when we did some work there, we found a pig that had markings on it, couldn't work out what it was. We took it down to MCV. They ran something like 18 million volts of electricity through this thing to get an x-ray of it. And it turns out to be Cumberland Gap furnace, which is as far away in Virginia as it is possible to get from anywhere. I mean, it's right at Cumberland Gap going into Kentucky. So, but they were transporting that material down and operating on it, at Tredegar and Bologna and all the other dozens and dozens of iron places and foundries and whatnot in downtown Richmond. If you look at the Civil War maps, the post-Civil War maps, all around Capitol Square is heavy-duty industry. There's iron and bronze casting. All sorts of people were doing heavy industry right around Capitol Square.
Sure. Not something that a lot of people think about when they think about the South, especially in that time period. You think more agrarian, but there definitely had to be some kind of heavy industry. And I appreciate the fact that you link all that together with Falling Creek, that was the beginning. And then there was a tradition from there spreading up the river and further outward into the mountains. And it is part of Virginia history. I mean, even considering today, the James River is still the center and the heart of a lot of heavy industry. Most of the U.S. Navy is built on the James River, for instance, among other things as well. But a lot of that is still right here. It's great that you point out Falling Creek is, as you mentioned, the great-granddaddy of all that. So, Lyle, I appreciate it. It's been a very insightful, fascinating discussion. If you can make it out here to see Lyle and others on May 4th, certainly look for the website that Lyle mentioned for more information to find out when some of those discussions, some of those talks in the area libraries and such are. But May 4th this year, upcoming, is the 400th anniversary of Falling Creek, or the first iteration of the 400th anniversary of Falling Creek. And as you mentioned, there's some more that you're doing. You do that every year, you said? In every May?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's either April or May, depending on, what we don't want to do is conflict with some other major event. So it's usually April or May of every year, and we have the same sort of things. I do the tours, and they have the stuff on the upper part there that people can come in, and it's free, so people can come in and watch and look and learn something and buy food and all that kind of good stuff. So it's a good day out for sure. Yeah,
perfect time of year in Virginia to go and do something like that. In July will be a different story, but
oh my goodness, yeah.
Right. Well, Lyle, thank you again. I appreciate it.
Glad to do it.
Thank you again for supporting the podcast. It's greatly appreciated. Please continue to spread the word and help this colony to keep growing. Start by following us on your favorite podcast provider, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and visit the website. Sharing episodes and other work is the best way to expand the community. Another great way to aid the podcast is by providing feedback on iTunes. If you have yet to do so, please take a few minutes and leave us a comment. Leaving those comments helps bring exposure in the iTunes network. It also helps me to know what I need to improve on in the future. If you would like to support the work financially, please consider supporting the podcast on Patreon. Links can be found on the website, or one can visit the campaign at patreon.com/VAHispod to see the choices and rewards being offered for your generosity. And please join me next time as we continue our walk through Virginia's history.
Mas tudo bate despedido do Zé,